Welcome to Screens of the Stone Age, the podcast where scientists review movies about prehistoric people. My name is Josh Lindell. I'm a grad student studying Neanderthal teeth, and I'm here with...
I am Kim Plomp. I am a bioarchaeologist. I study human skeletons, health and disease, and evolution.
And I'm Ross Barnett, with background in ancient DNA and Pleistocene megafauna.
And today we're reviewing the movie Horror Express from 1972. Ross, you found this movie and sent us a very excited email.
Yeah.
I'd never heard of it, and I assumed it was going to be a kind of terrible B-movie, but it actually stars Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing in apparently one of their many roles together. I don't know if I've actually seen anything they've done together. Have either of you seen it, something they've done together?
Yeah, I think I've seen some of the Dracula films that they were in, but yeah, I can't remember. I mean, this is a rare one where they're both technically the good guys, rather than Christopher Lee being a baddie and Peter Cushing being the one that has to kill him. Of course, they're both in Star Wars, separated by long periods of time. So Peter Cushing's Grand Moff Tarkin and Christopher Lee's Count Dooku. Which, yeah, terrible names, but great actors.
I don't know either of them.
It's literally speechless. But yeah, I mean, they were great friends in real life, which is, quite nice.
So who wants to summarize this one?
Ross.
Okay, yeah, I can do that. All right. So, I mean, going back to what Josh's saying about thinking it being a terrible B movie, I would say that it's a good terrible B movie. I mean, it doesn't have any pretensions to be anything other than it is, which is like a kind of hammer horror B film with. I mean, we kind of talk about Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee in quite reverential terms now, but they were definitely jobbing actors who took roles and were happy to be typecast. And definitely, Christopher Lee is 6'4", kind of cadaverous looking, sinister, has a background in the Secret Service in World War II. Yeah, I think he was perfect for playing baddies, and he kind of very much lent into that. And here he's a good guy for once, which is nice. So the film is sort of set in, I guess, Edwardian times. So like 1906 is what kind of flashes up on the screen first of all. Christopher Lee is Sir Alexander Sexton, or Saxton. He's on a Royal Society mission to somewhere in China looking for fossils, and he finds them. He's kind of on an expedition in a cave somewhere with some Sherpas, some guides, and he finds this very well preserved, mummified, frozen ape person in the cave, and that's kind of where the sort of film starts. It looks like a frozen yeti. And he immediately, because this is Edwardian time, says, right, we're having that, and takes it out of the Chinese cave where it's been found, sticks it in a big box, and then, interestingly, for a fossil, he locks that box up with some very strong chains and padlocks. And it is next seen in I think it's Beijing or Shanghai railway station, where he's about to ship it back to, presumably, the British Museum, where everything kind of ends up. And so he's kind of, Saxton is there, he's got his fossil locked up, he's very happy, he's trying to get a ticket on the train for himself and his box, but it's not going very well because the conductor says there's no room left and he can't get a ticket, and this makes him pretty angry. And then Peter Cushing arrives. So Peter Cushing plays Professor Wells, who is clearly a colleague / rival / adversary of Saxton, and so they kind of have a bit of banter in the train station. Wells tries to find out what's going on. He uses his kind of local knowledge to essentially bribe the conductor to make sure that he gets the ticket for the train that he wants, and for Saxton to get a ticket for the train as well. And while this is going on in the conductor's office, we see that the guard that's been posted to guard the box with the locked fossils inside is being distracted by a kind of sneak thief, pickpocket kind of person. who manages to get the guard to disappear somewhere and has a go at picking the locks off the box with the fossil. And then the next thing we see, the pickpocket is dead, with a very kind of glazed look on his face beside the box. And that's where things start to take a turn for the macabre and for the spooky, as you'd expect from a kind of Hammer horror film. With this dead pickpocket on the floor, before they've even got on the train, there's a kind of classic standoff with the kind of locals who are shocked at this dead person. The conductor's there. A monk, a kind of Russian Orthodox monk, appears out of nowhere and has some big prognostications about how it's not just that this pickpocket has died, it's the work of the devil. There's something evil in the crate, and everyone kind of dismisses him as a mad monk. But it kind of adds to the uneasiness of the scene. They get onto the train and they find out that they're both kind of in the same berth. We meet some of the other people. There's a policeman on the train. There's the conductor. There's the kind of luggage carriage where all the luggage is, including the fossil box. We meet a Polish countess who kind of wants to lock away her jewels in the safe beside the fossil crate. She has a little dog with her, and while she's flirting madly with Christopher Lee, the dog is clearly in some distressed by whatever's in the box, the fossil, which has this uncanny appearance and seems to have killed the pickpocket already. I mean, as always, there's almost too much to sort of, the way I take notes from these films, I never manage to sort of do justice to how the story kind of unfolds. But essentially, Wells is really interested in what's in the box. He kind of bribes the guard on the train to have a look in the box and tell him what's there when everyone's away. Overnight, this happens, and of course, the conductor is killed by whatever in the box. It has a really weird, freaky, glowing red eye, which kills the conductor. And we see for the first time a hairy arm come out of the crate, which has, for reasons unknown, a window in it with bars over it. If you're going to ship a fossil, I don't think you need to have a window with bars on your crate unless you want it to escape. So this arm comes out of the crate and manages to pick the lock, which is quite impressive for a 2 million year old mummy. And it comes out and then it goes back. It escapes essentially. And we see later on that it's put the dead conductor in the box and kind of locked it back up. So the next day they find the dead guards. They've been looking for him. They find that some of the screws on the crate have been taken out. They find that the fossil itself is missing, and that things are not great. What other stuff? There's a policeman, the kind of chief guard on the train, is instantly kind of starts to do his job about, there's been a murder, what's going on. He wants to get into the mystery of what's happening. And before too much has managed to happen, the ape man, we see it's alive, it's wandering around the carriage. It kills a soldier, so there's soldiers on the train as well. Lights go out, doors open. We see Professor Wells, that's Peter Cushing, while all this kind of stuff's going on in other parts of the train. He's having dinner with a mysterious woman who barged into his berth earlier on and said that she needed to get out of Shanghai desperately and that she would make it worth his while if he looked after her. Wink, wink. Well, obviously, as a 70s film, that's not gone into in too much depth. But he's having dinner with this woman who's essentially very mysterious and hints at kind of having a mysterious past. That another character who is an engineer joins them at dinner and says that he recognizes this mysterious woman from somewhere, and she says, "No, he can't possibly recognize me." It's essentially like it is a B movie. I mean, there's no getting away from the fact that it is a B movie. It's schlocky, but in a good way. It's sort of schlocky in probably a way that's been copied many times since it's come out, but it was one of the first to do it in this way. So while they're all having dinner, Peter Cushing is having the fish, and the fish gets wheeled out. and he notices that the fish's eyes are white, just like the dead pickpocket and the dead train guard, and that sends that sort of sets the wheels in motion inside Peter Cushing's head, and it's a clue as to what's going on. I mean, this is all kind of set up for what is essentially like a crazy beast let loose on a train, a fossil from 2 million years ago that's come back to life, has been defrosted, and is going around killing all these people in a weird way, which causes them to kind of bleed out of their eyes and ears, and their eyes to end up going white. And after a few more kills and after a few more autopsies, so one of the cool things they do is that they do an autopsy on the train guard, and apart from his bleeding from all his orifices and his eyes being white, they find that his brain is completely smooth, which is obviously super weird, because if anyone's seen a brain, they know it should be wrinkly. And this leads to some fantastic exposition as to how the ape-man fossil must be absorbing the knowledge of all these people that it's killing. And that's why the brains are smooth, and that's why it knows how to pick locks, and that's why all its victims' eyes turn white. That their memories have been erased and have been transferred to the ape person. But there you go. And yes, so there's more kind of attacks by this ape person. We see the mysterious woman that Professor Wells was having dinner with try to break into the safe to steal the Polish countess's jewels, but she gets attacked by the ape monster and gets brain smoothed, as it were. We find out some more about some of the other passengers. So the mad monk that had said that the crate was the work of Satan is actually in the employ of the Polish countess for reasons that are never satisfactorily explained. And there's the Polish count as well.
I thought I got like a whole Rasputin and
definitely.
Yeah, like that whole vibe thing, that he was there in the same way that Rasputin was for the Queen.
Like the spiritual advisor kind of thing. But he's clearly off his rocker. I mean, he's nuts. He also looks very much like a young Robert De Niro, I thought. Anyway, so we move from there to so the mysterious woman has been killed. Turns out she was a spy / jewel thief after the Countess's jewels. The police are really worried. I noticed that Peter Cushing has on a really exquisite dressing gown at one stage. And the policeman, who's called Wells, he gets attacked by the ape man, but he doesn't get killed. He just faints and recovers, it seems, fairly well. They kind of put him back in his berth, but he wakes up and there's clearly something going on. He's not his usual self, and he's very protective of his left arm. He doesn't want anyone to see his left arm.
But he's the one that shot the guy, right?
The policeman, he shot the ape man. Yeah. So the ape man is now being shot by the policeman, who's called Wells.
No, the policeman is Inspector Mirov. Wells is Peter Cushing.
Yes. Sorry, that's right. So Mirov's the policeman. He shot the ape man after all these 3 murders that have happened. And the ape man is trying to do the red eye brain smoothing on him, but that doesn't work as far as we know. But Mirov, the policeman, does faint and gets returned to his berth. And when he wakes up, clearly something is not right. The mad monk thinks that the ape man is not dead. They do an autopsy on the ape man, which involves taking out its one remaining weird eye and syringing out the fluid and looking at the fluid under a microscope, as well as the fluids of the other victims. And this is where it gets really bonkers. So they look at it under a lovely kind of brass microscope, and they can see wafting in the eye fluid gunge the last thing that the eye saw, which is, it's a common trope. I mean, it's based in real, I guess, 19th century science. This idea that your eye records the last thing you see, and that could be useful in crime detection. People did all sorts of experiments of this. It's called optography. It was done by a German physiologist called Wilhelm Kuhn, looking for the imprint of the last thing that somebody saw in their eye. if you just looked at it with a good enough microscope, you could see this image preserved, which would be a fantastic thing for detectives to use in murder cases and things like that. And it's kind of held over almost even to the modern day. You see it in films. I know it's a kind of trope in Sleepy Hollow, when Ichabod Crane, played by Johnny Depp, is investigating the murders in the Tim Burton version of Sleepy Hollow. He's intent on looking at the eyes of the dead victims to try and see if he can find out what the last image is, so he can solve the case.
I remember it from Wild Wild West, where they put a lamp inside a decapitated head and it's like a projector out of its eyes.
Yeah, I mean, it's really quite a sort of fascinating idea. Totally wrong, but fascinating.
But you could see where it came from with like the first initial cameras. You could see where they got that idea. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it makes sense given the kind of paradigms of the time, and you can see why people kind of went to a lot of effort to try and kind of prove it. But it seems to work in this universe, in the Horror Express universe, and so Saxton and Wells are looking through the microscope, and they can see kind of wibbly wobbly images of what do they see? When they look at the murder victims, they see
Brontosaurus, a pterodactyl, and the Earth from space.
That's it. So when they're looking at the eye of the ape man, they see Brontosaurus, pterodactyls, and the Earth from space, which is a bit weird.
But to be clear, this is not burned on the retina. This is an image that just shows up floating on a drop of blood under the eye fluid.
Yeah, that's
right?
It. In the vitreous humor. It's fantastic. I mean, it just it kind of works in the kind of spooky universe that these guys are in. But yes, I mean, it's been clearly established earlier on that the ape man fossil mummy is 2 million years old. Yet somehow he can see brontosauruses and pterodactyls, which I guess if you're, what would be the way to explain it? If you are time blind and don't understand, that 2 million years ago is still 64 million years after the dinosaurs went extinct.
I took that to mean because they also saw something where they saw a cell dividing or something too, didn't they? Because they wanted to show the Duchess, because they were like, you said you don't believe in evolution, but look, there's a picture of it happening or something like that. So I took it as it wasn't the person's eye, that it was the entity's visions.
Right.
That's what I took.
I mean, at this point, we're not really clear that it's an entity.
No, we don't
until
know
we
yet.
Kind of see until we see the Earth from space, and we think, well, what ape person has seen the Earth from space?
They also say that this alien doesn't store its visual memories in its brain, but it stores the visual memories in the eyeball, which is why they can find them. So presumably, you can't just take a normal human's eyeball and see their last sight in the drop of the fluid, but it's specifically because this alien stores its visual memories in the eyeballs that this works.
But I thought they looked at one of the victim's eyeball fluids,
but they looked at
and saw something in that.
It was a victim. Oh yeah, no, you're right. It was a victim. It wasn't the police officer, because he's still alive at this point. Yeah. So it was just a victim.
Maybe we should not try that hard to sort of.
Absolutely, I think that's a hiding to nothing. So this kind of leads to the way of tracking down the monster. So they think that maybe as the Mad Monk has said, it's maybe not actually dead. Maybe it's transferred its consciousness. Maybe it's not an ape man. Maybe it's some kind of weird alien. I mean, this is essentially Hammer Horror's version of The Thing, the classic, I think it's John W. Campbell short story, which has been filmed as The Thing from Another World, The Thing by John Carpenter, and all these other ones, of this idea of a shape-shifting alien which kind of hides inside people, and you have the paranoia of not knowing who's real and who's an alien. That's what's going on in Horror Express, except it's set on a train in the 1900s. But yes, anyway, the kind of idea starts to take hold that this is something more than just a kind of reanimated fossil, that it's a weird kind of entity that kind of sucks your brains out through your eyes, can be transferred from individual to individual, and absorbs memories, and that's quite a scary thing. The monk obviously has been part of this conversation, and he says it's the eye of Satan. He's very much obsessed with Satan, and he steals the eye. Once they've kind of had this expositionary scene about the images that are stored in the eye gunk, the monk steals the eye and thinks that he can get in touch with the entity and give it back its eye, and that will be good for him. We see that the entity is in fact not actually dead. It's transferred to Mirov, the policeman. That he was hiding his arm because it's turned into a hairy arm, which doesn't really make sense in terms of the kind of rules of why would it?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Arm?
Like it took
there's no
the
logic
fossil's
to it at all.
arm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, so he kills the conductor because the conductor was wanting to stop the train, which again doesn't seem like something that would really care about. It can just hide in another person. But Saxon and Wells come up with the idea that if they can check everyone's eyes, that might be a way to tell if anyone's become the entity. And so they do this in the train. They kind of look at everyone's eyes, and everyone passes the test, including Mirov, the policeman, who we actually know is the entity because he's got the hairy arm, and he has killed the train conductor. He's also killed the engineer who had been Wells and the mysterious woman's dinner companion. There's a fantastic line when they're trying to discover who the entity is. I didn't write down who it's between, but I think it might be Mirov actually who is the entity. He says to Saxon and Wells that any one of us could be the monster, and Wells, Peter Cushing, says, "Monster? We're British, you know." Which is just amazing.
I thought I misheard that at first, and I had to go back and listen again because I was like, "No, they didn't say that."
They did say that. So everything's kicking off. They're in real danger, and their eye test hasn't worked. But then they have a realization that every time the murders have occurred, the lights have been off, and so maybe the eye test only works when the lights are off, and so that's why their eye test failed. They need to switch the lights off, and that's when the eyes will turn red, and they'll be able to figure out what's going on. So things are kind of at a pretty critical point on the train. And then, yes, what else has happened? The mad monk, has pledged his service to Mirov, who he's realized is the entity. He's given him the eye, and said he pledges himself to Satan. So, I mean, obviously his years of training as in the seminary haven't really stuck with him if he's that easily swayed to the dark side. Anyway, so it switches away from the train completely, and we meet this bit I didn't really understand. We go to what appears to be like a Cossacks train station, where the head Cossack is Telly Savalas, who goes about chewing scenery like left, right, and center. He's nursing a hangover. He's in a jail cell with an unnamed woman under some fur blankets. Someone's told him he has to stop the train, orders from Moscow or something. So Telly Savalas takes his platoon of Cossacks onto the train. He gets sort of shouted at by the Count and Countess, the Polish Count and Countess, for them having to sort of spend time with the plebs on the rest of the train, and he allows them to disappear off.
I'm glad you didn't understand this either, because I was like, where did this guy come from? Like, what is happening?
Yeah, how?
Yeah.
What? But I mean, it's great because Telly Savalas is just like acting up a storm. He's really relishing his role as the kind of Cossacks leader. Anyway, he goes onto the train, tries to figure out what's going on. While this is happening, everyone's a bit nervous. Saxon, Christopher Lee's character, switches off the gas supply to the lights to try and flush the entity out into the open, which this does. So Mirov is the entity. He goes about killing all the Cossacks really easily. None of them seem to put up a fight, apart from Telly Savalas, who kind of writhes all over the place and has a kind of 5-minute death scene. And then the monk helps to kill the soldiers. Everyone's shooting at everyone. Does the Mirov, the policeman, get killed as the entity, and then somehow transfers his consciousness to the monk, who's called Pujardov?
I thought the monk asked for it. The monk sacrificed
himself.
himself.
Monk asked for it. He's clearly on board with the entity and wants to be its next vessel. So Mirov is killed, the policeman is killed, but transfers to the monk. The monk goes to the Count and Countess. They're the only two passengers that weren't with the rest of the train. We kind of get a bit of insight into the monk's previous life when he's speaking as the entity, which has absorbed all of his memories. He says that the monk was in love with the Countess, blah, blah, blah. He's going to kill everyone. But then Saxton arrives, Christopher Lee arrives just in time. They have a little bit of kind of philosophical banter. Then all the dead people come back to life. So this is a new power that we didn't realize he possessed before this exact moment. So Telly Savalas comes back to life. All the Cossacks and soldiers come back to life. And they decide to charge Saxon and Wells and all the passengers to try and kill them. These kind of zombies take over the train, Train to Busan sort of style. Meanwhile, again, somehow there has been message sent from the train to Moscow and from Moscow to the next station on the railway track that the train is traveling through, and they've been told to divert the train, which will luckily send the train off an unfinished railway track and down a really steep gorge. So this is what happens. They change the points to put the train on essentially a suicide course. While this is happening as well, Wells and Saxton have managed to disengage the one carriage, which is the last carriage, which has all the passengers on it, and luckily doesn't have any of the entity or the reanimated zombie soldiers on it. And so the train careens off the unfinished track and explodes into 1,000 bits at the bottom of the gorge. But luckily, the one carriage that has all the passengers in stops like just at the very last second on the last bit of train track. And so that's the end of Horror Express. The entity from another world and all its zombie soldier slaves are dead, and Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing and all the passengers have survived.
It was a bit disconcerting how easily the guys in charge of like the rail track, they just get this one message saying to like kill everybody on the train. They were like, okay.
Yep. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Life is cheap in Tsarist Russia, I guess.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, even from just sort of listening to myself with that overview, I mean, it doesn't really make sense. You have to watch it, and even then, it doesn't really make sense. But it's essentially The Thing on a train, but with 70s aesthetics, which makes it quite fun.
Yep, and Mammoth as well.
I haven't seen The Thing, but
what?
In this movie, yeah, I know, I got to see it. But in this movie, the entity can hide in anybody, and that's what like makes the tension. But the audience never doesn't know where it is. So like maybe there's tension for the passengers, but not really as the audience. It's there's not really any mystery to it.
Which is what makes The Thing so brilliant, and what makes this film not so brilliant.
Yeah. So we've already nitpicked a little bit of the science of eye memories. What did you call that field?
Optography.
There isn't all that much about anthropology or paleontology to talk about. They only have a few little sciencey lines, but there's not that much. The main thing is that he says over and over is that the ape is 2 million years old. And that got me thinking about how old did we know or think the Earth was in 1906, which is a little difficult to Google. There's actually a Wikipedia page about the age of the Earth going over the whole process of how we learned how old the Earth is.
Yeah. I mean, my kind of memory of it is that until, Marie Curie and the discovery of radioactivity, and then Lord Kelvin's use of radioactivity to explain the heat of the Earth, the sort of scientific understanding is that the Earth wasn't that old, because it couldn't be that old because it was still pretty hot inside. So,
but there was some geologists who recognized that, and paleontologists that recognized that the timing that it would take to fossilize would be a long time.
Yeah, which is really interesting, because you have these fairly kind of fundamental clashes between different branches of of science quite early on. But like Kim says, between geology and physics, and essentially, in that case, geology was right, and physics needed a bit more information.
Yeah, so Lord Kelvin was one of the people who made the first estimates, and he was basically just going off of the assumption that the Earth started off as a molten ball and it's been uniformly cooling, and that gave him estimates. He kept revising his estimates, but they were anywhere from like 20 million to maybe like 100 or maybe 400 million at the most, and he kept like sort of gravitating back to like 20 to 40 million years, which is the age of the Earth as we know it today is 4.5 billion years, so that was way off. And the thing he was missing was radioactivity and also convection. So there was somebody else towards the end of the 1800s that created a model that incorporated convection, and they came up with a number of about 2 to 3 billion.
Not bad.
But that was pretty much ignored because it didn't match up with the prevailing wisdom. And then, it was once we got into understanding radioactivity in the early 1900s that they started to get better and better estimates, and they sort of keep getting closer and closer until like the 1960s or whenever it was that we got our current understanding. And so the movie takes place in 1906. It looks like there was a guy, I forgot his name, who was doing estimates based on radioactivity, like sort of measuring radioactive decay, what would become radiometric dating. And he was getting estimates of hundreds of millions of years old in 1905, but he didn't publish them until 1907. So it's pretty interesting that this movie's right at 1906, right in the middle of when we were starting to get better answers to this question.
Yeah.
The other harder question to answer is how old did we think human fossils in the Pleistocene were during this time? Because it's very hard to Google like the history of the age of the Pleistocene, because it just gives you the age of the Pleistocene if you Google that. So I couldn't find that answer. Does anybody know that?
Well, when was Piltdown Man? Piltdown Man was around that time, wasn't it?
I think it's a bit later. I think it's like 1910s for Piltdown.
1912, yeah.
But I mean, it's also interesting that all the way through the film they're very clear about this fossil being 2 million years old. When how do they get an absolute date from a fossil at that time before radiometric dating could be used, or as well beyond the limits of kind of relative dating with kind of literary sources.
It also wasn't a fossil; it had soft tissue, like it was decomposing.
Absolutely. So maybe it wasn't a fossil at all. Maybe it was a Yeti. I mean, that would make much more sense.
That would actually
just a recent one.
Yeah.
That winter. Well, there's the other question, because it was frozen, but China was never glaciated during the Pleistocene, was it? Certainly not continuously to keep something frozen since then.
But I imagine that I guess this could be from some of the Himalayan mountains, which would have been frozen if it's from some of the disputed territories.
There's the other thing, because they say it's from Manchuria, but the title card says they're in Sichuan province, which are two very different places in China. So it's a little bit unclear about where it actually came from.
But if it's up a mountain, then tops of mountains have been cold, and in caves has been cold, whether it's a Pleistocene or not. But yeah, I think Yeti makes more sense.
One of my, there was a lot of things that didn't make sense, but so the entity said that it's been on Earth for a long time in different living forms, and it said it started as in a protozoa, and then it went on to different life forms. So how would it have gone? Like, did it adapt as it moved from life form to life form? It adapted how it moved around too, because protozoa wouldn't have eyes. And then if it could move to a protozoa, then you probably didn't die in the train wreck. It just could have just then moved into anything that was in the soil, any microbe or anything like that, right?
Or a bit of E. coli in one of its victims' guts, or who knows?
Exactly, and then just start again. But then how would it if those don't have eyes? So is it just sensory organs? Is it like, would it work with any kind of energy thing? I don't know.
This is why we we'd all be first to die in any kind of horror film scenario because we'd be too busy trying to figure out the flaws in the horror film logic, and then we'd get brain smoothied by this ape while we're thinking.
Yeah, that's true.
We could talk about the brain smoothie a little bit because they do try to explain. I mean, the idea they talk about is that the wrinkles of the brain sort of correlate to like cognition. So like animals that do less thinking, I guess, have smoother brains, and humans have very wrinkly brains. And so the whole concept of the wrinkly brain is that your cognition is based on connections within the gray matter. So if you can take a surface area that's way too large and then wrinkle it up, you can fit more connections into a brain. So, I mean, they're right in the sense that, you know, all of the wrinkles in your brain give you more thinking power, but they suggest that those wrinkles come from your thinking during life, which carves the channels into your brain, which, of course, doesn't make any sense because babies start off with wrinkly brains.
And your memories would be etched on your brain, too. That's what they said.
It's kind of a sweet idea, isn't it? The idea that if you think really hard, you're just like wrinkling the inside of your brain.
Also, the opposite of that, where if you forget something, then suddenly a fissure sort of smooths over.
But I could see them thinking, maybe if not exactly that, but somewhere like that at the same time as they were thinking that it could be possible that the eyes were retaining the last image or something. Like, to me, that seems to fit together with that type of biological understanding.
Yeah. It's like 19th century science, cutting edge 19th century science.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't really a lot of paleontology or anthropology in the film.
Or science.
Or science, yeah, or sense, or logic. But yeah, Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee are supposed to be scientists, and Christopher Lee, according to the title card, is working for the Royal Society when he's out kind of fossil collecting.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's fairly non-scientific, I think. We're giving it too much credit by actually discussing some of the nonsense in there.
One of my favorite lines was when the doctor who was romancing the jewel thief before he knew she was a jewel thief, because she was had to stay in his cabin, so he obviously thought he was going to get lucky, and so he went up to the female doctor that he had been traveling with, and he said, like, I'm going to need your help tonight, and she kind of just looks over at the young woman and it's like, well, I would expect so at your age.
Yeah. I mean, I heard that line, it's like, surely they can't mean that, what everyone's thinking they mean. I mean, that is super risque for a 70s
What
film.
would they have used before Viagra? I guess it would have been just some herbal stuff.
I mean, God knows. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. She's a character I didn't really talk about in the overview, but Peter Cushing, the Professor Wells, has a female lab assistant stroke, I guess, dog's body stroke, she does everything for him.
Yeah.
And she seems to be far more competent than he is.
Yes.
I mean, I was thinking, does this film pass the Bechdel test? There's quite a few female characters. There's the female jewel thief, there's the female countess, there's the female lab assistant.
I don't think so.
Yeah. Do any of them talk to each other about anything that isn't one of the male characters?
There was a moment when the jewel thief and the Duchess or the Countess were together in the same room, because that was when the first time I realized they were the different people, because they looked very similar.
Yeah, they did.
But I don't know if they spoke.
Is that the one where the engineer had just been killed? Is that the two women that were, because there were two women in that car when they were just sort of hovering over the engineer's body, discussing how he was killed? But
the engineer gets killed after the jewel thief gets killed.
Yeah, she dies first.
Oh, well then who was the woman that the engineer was with in his cabin then?
That was
just a random woman. She's never really explained.
So there are two. I think the Countess was also there, so there's that random woman and the Countess in the same scene, but I think they're mostly just talking about the engineer's death.
Which is technically about a man.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think if I was watching, I mean, it's got quite a good reputation and quite a high IMDb score.
It's a good, bad, scary movie.
Yeah, it's a good bad film,
Yeah.
which is off its time, but is still interesting enough that a kind of modern audience might get something out of it.
Yeah, and it's corny and cheesy in an enjoyable way.
Yeah, it's good acting. I think Telly Savalas is fantastic at just how much scenery he chews. Like, he's really relishing his role as a crazy Cossack soldier, and just does his most overacting.
Yeah, I think a cat must have distracted me or something at the scene when he came in, because then when I looked away for half a second, and then the cast had changed and like everything, and I was like, where did this person
Yeah.
come from? Why is he in charge?
I went back to rewatch it and I couldn't really understand why he got involved in the situation at all.
Yep. Anyway.
Here's something I'm not sure if it's a 1906 thing or a 1970s thing, but when Saxton first meets the engineer, he asks him about the chalk because the monk tried drawing a cross on the crate with chalk and it wouldn't draw.
Yes.
And so the engineer asks him how to explain that scientifically, and Professor Saxton says, hypnosis,
and
yoga. These mystics can be terribly convincing.
I think that's a 1970s thing. Yeah, I laughed at that. That was funny. I mean, the chalk could have just not drawn on that particular fabric either.
Yeah.
The monk was so great, though. He was kind of my favorite character because it was so overblown, Rasputin-ish. And then he changed from the devil's in this car, God must this, God must that, to I'm going to curse you, and now I want the entity in me. Like, he went to the mystic really quickly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. He went from, this place is cursed to, I'll be your living vessel. That's fine.
And he was always like hunched over in the way that, like, he was just, it was a good.
Mad, staring eyes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he was my favorite character.
And did nobody else think he looked like Robert De Niro? Was that just me?
I didn't see that. No.
I didn't think about it, but I'll have to go back and look.
There's some nice exchanges where they kind of talk about evolution in a 1906 sort of way. So the Countess has heard of it and says that it's immoral or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Which is probably a fairly common 1906 view.
Yes.
So at least, it gets mentioned.
Well, and they said that there was something in the eye that they saw that would prove to her or show her that evolution happens. But I couldn't quite understand what it was that they saw. Maybe
the picture of the dinosaurs.
Yeah, maybe.
Which are very clearly, 1970s dinosaurs, which is always quite fun. But I mean, as great as these kind of films of this shape-shifting alien are, The Thing or Horror Express or whatever, how would something like this evolve? I mean, it's not something that would be possible as far as my understanding of how life evolves takes place. There could never be a kind of selection pressure on something to mimic so many different hosts. I mean, where we see kind of the evolution of really good camouflage, it's only for a single thing. And when you have a butterfly that's mimicking a leaf, it doesn't take on the characteristics of a leaf. No. It doesn't absorb the memories of a leaf or anything like that. It just looks quite like a leaf.
Well, and also the entity said that they came to Earth and then they left him, and then he spent time waiting. So the entity's been, well, I'm saying we don't need to gender it, I suppose, but it was it was on its own. So it couldn't have adapted in that way. It itself could change how it did things, but it wouldn't have been evolution, right? Because it never reproduced, I suppose.
But I mean, we must be talking about something supernatural because it's not, shape-shifting. It's sort of like possessing like a ghost or something, right? So it doesn't even have a physical body. It's not even something that science can study, right?
And it's not only possessing, but it's also it's altering the body too, because its memories from millions of years ago are in the vitreous eye liquid of one of its victims. So it's not just possessing, it's like altering.
It's making their eyes red and their arms hairy.
Yeah. The arm, even of the fossil thing, fossil in quotations, it was like well preserved. It was just a hairy arm. And then the face was all bone and skin, like decomposing like a mummy or something like that. So maybe the arm was special and they just forgot to mention why.
Maybe. I mean, the kind of the way they did the kind of mummy looked quite good. I mean, for the 70s, it was quite freaky looking.
It was scary, yeah.
Like Kim says, with the decomposed flesh and the only one eye working. I thought it was quite cool.
We also really only see it in darkness, which makes it hard to study as a anthropologist when I want to see it clearly, but it like works well for the movie.
Yeah. And I guess at 2 million years in China, or the kind of Chinese East Asian region, you have a couple of potential kind of hominids that could have formed the mummy.
Yeah, Homo erectus.
Yeah. The Denisovan ancestor as well, maybe.
If it is 2 million years old, which I think we can say that they have no way of knowing that in 1906. That's got to be a wild guess on his part. But would we have had hominins in China at 2 million years? Because the earliest outside of Africa that we know about is Dmanisi in Georgia, which is about 1.8 million. Do we have anything older than that at this point?
I don't think so. But I think when you're for a movie like this, they actually, at least there was hominins in that area at 1.8 million. I mean, that's just finding one more fossil that pushes the date back a bit more, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there was one in Zhao something, but I don't know if that was earlier.
Yeah. I mean, Dmanisi's I think still counts as the earliest outside of Africa of Homo, at least. I mean, my kind of partial understanding is there is some sort of tentative and circumstantial evidence for maybe pre-Homo outside of Africa in the kind of lithic records of Southeast Asia, Indonesia, places like that.
Wikipedia says that there's stone tool evidence pushing it back to 2.12 million years in China.
Yeah.
I don't remember what Matt Tosheri told us when we were talking about Homo floresiensis, but there's the idea that these small hominins in Southeast Asia maybe came from an earlier migration before Homo erectus, which would have been, before 2 million years ago.
But what would that have been?
Something more like Australopithecus, I guess, since Homo floresiensis has some alleged Australopithecus traits. Another interesting thing to think about with regards to the time period for this movie in 1906, it's easy to think about all the different hominin species it could be right now, like that we know of today. But at the time, there were only 2 other identified human species, which were Neanderthals and Homo erectus, which at the time would have been called
Pithecanthropus?
Pithecanthropus erectus, yeah. So Neanderthals were known from the early 1800s, but not named until 1856, I think, when the Neander Valley fossil was discovered. So I think they had like maybe 3 Neanderthal specimens up to the 1850s. And all the naturalists in Western Europe were speculating about where they should find the earliest human ancestors, and Darwin and others thought Africa, which turned out to be correct, but other people thought Asia, and that's why Eugene Dubois went to Indonesia in 1891 to try and find human ancestors, and he did. He found Homo erectus bones, but he named them Pithecanthropus erectus. And as far as I know, at 1906, those are the only human hominin fossils that we had. Maybe some more Neanderthals from Europe. And then as we know, in 1912, there was the Piltdown hoax, which people believed in a lot because it suggested that the earliest human ancestors came from England, which they really liked that idea. And then it's not until like the 1920s that we found Australopithecus in Africa.
Yeah.
The Tong child, I think, is the first Australopithecus identified in Africa.
1924 for Tong.
So in 1906, there was almost no human fossil record.
Which would explain why the Royal Society is sending him out to find them, I guess.
And because Eugene Dubois had just 15 years earlier identified human fossils in Indonesia, so it makes sense that they'd be looking in China.
Yeah.
Of course, they did find a lot of stuff in China later. The Zhukudian cave was excavated in the 30s, I think.
Yeah, pre-World War II, anyway.
Yeah.
But can you imagine the write-up? I mean, the Royal Society are going to want to have a manuscript for their expedition.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the kind of conclusions? In conclusion, we discovered a extraterrestrial entity inside our fossil, which killed about a dozen people on our train ride home.
But we saved the
Do
other.
not recommend.
Yeah.
We do not recommend fossil hunting in this region.
I feel like, I mean, if there's any of the fossil remains to pull out of the train wreck, I feel like the report is going to be very just focused on the fossils, and then there's going to be a little footnote in there like, oh, by the way, incidental to the fossils, there was an alien possessing it, but it actually has nothing to do with the fossils, so that's a totally different paper.
Yeah.
If you've been enjoying Screens of the Stone Age, get in touch with us. Follow us on Twitter at SOTSA_podcast and on Facebook at SOTSA podcast, or send us an email to screensofthestoneage@gmail.com. Screens of the Stone Age is supported by the Paleoanthropological Society of Canada. Find out more at pasc-scpa.ca.